The RCMP Heritage Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organisation mandated to share the story of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is one of those stories, part of your heritage.
We had a very unique opportunity when my dad turned 80 years old, and he'd been retired almost 30 years by this point. And but in a gesture of respect and congratulations on his 80th birthday and his time on the parade square, he was provided an opportunity, our family was provided an opportunity where Dad was the troop commander for number 1 troop. I was troop commander for the number 2 troop, and my brother Graham was the troop commander for the number 3 troop. And we completed the Sergeant Major's parade that day, a day in June. And with all of our family there, wives, my sister, it was a day that our family will never forget.
I know one of the favorite stories my dad used to tell at regimental dinners and other places, it leads to my fame, I guess, is that when I was very young, I had a copy of his uniform in actuality, and the tourists would see me around and they would think that I was a mascot of some kind. And on one particular noon parade, being around 4 years old, not knowing any better, my father marched out on parade, and not knowing any better, I followed him out onto that noon parade. And he had a very long stick, and he was waving it around, and he was yelling at the members to come to attention, and they didn't come to attention, which was unparalleled in my dad's experience, because in my dad's experience, whatever he said was law, and they would immediately snap to. But they weren't snapping to, and there was some snickering going on in the ranks, which this is a new experience. And then he yelled at them some more and tried to bring them to attention. Now the laughing's actually getting worse. So he gets very angry with this thing going on in front of him. And you have to picture it. At the time, we would have maybe 500 tourists lined up to watch the noon parade. So he's very angry. He kicks all the people off the noon parade square. So off they go. So there's a few toddle off, and finally they all kind of mass exit in the face of his fury and his loud voice and his huge presence. And he turns around to storm off the parade square and runs into me. I'm standing behind him, waving my stick and kind of a match to him, etc. And I remember he told me, well, I have memories too, but he hit me and I went yipping and ki-ying across the parade square to my home, and to the protective arms of my mother kind of idea. And he immediately was concerned, because the tourists who were there watching, he was scared they were going to lynch him, because they all hear he had struck this poor little mascot kind of fellow and sent me yipping and ki-ying, not knowing what was actually going on. And so it was one of those kind of iconic little stories of my childhood.
I'll never forget the first time I was walking down the parade square in uniform, and my dad was standing in front of the chapel. He'd since retired by that time. And he's told me many times that that first time he saw me in uniform, he thought it was him 30, 40 years ago walking down in front of the parade square. And I think of that frequently, because that parade square was such a important part of our upbringing. You know, I walked on that parade square for the first time when I was 5 years old, rode my bike across that parade square. But more importantly, I had an opportunity to watch the recruits and members of the force march on that parade square, whether it be a morning parade, whether it be Sergeant Major's parade at noon, whether it be the sunset ceremonies, for all of my life until I joined the force in 1976.
So many people focus on the very visual aspect of my father because he was visually quite stunning. He had lots of medals, he had a handlebar mustache, he had an extremely loud voice. He looked immaculate, always. And people always focus on that. And I think they should, because I think it was, you know, phenomenal. But what they often miss is his link to actually enhancing and changing police training, not only for the RCMP, but for police forces all over the world. And I can speak with some confidence on that because that's my job now. My job now is to create new training. And what I'm seeing is all the catchphrases, all the new fundamental training my father brought into being during his tenure as a training officer. Examples of that would be scenario-based training or scenario-based learning. Prior to the mid-70s, the training was very enforcement-oriented and it was very structured like a university where someone stood at the front of a class and told you what you needed to know. With my father in scenario-based learning, what happened is you got to actually experience those things. You got to be part of that role play. And he brought that in back in the late 70s, and now it's a catchphrase for police forces all over the world. And I've traveled all over. I've traveled to Australia. They want to have part of that. We interview all the time with different police forces, and it's tremendous. It's the same thing as when my father first joined the RCMP and police forces at that time. It was tremendous. It was just enforcement. You'll catch the bad guy. And my father, in his tenure as training officer, with the help of others, of course, brought in human relations and dealing with people and dealing with people on a human level, which was so different, was a different way of thinking.
My dad, obviously, you know, is very well known as his time as a sergeant major and corps sergeant major. We went to Penhold in 1966, which was a tremendous experience as well, too, to set up P division, new training division there. But we returned in 1967 when my dad was commissioned to become training officer. And that's a position he held from 1967 until he retired in December of 1979. That's a long time. And through that time, he received you know, a promotion to superintendent as well, too. And so really he had two careers at Depot, one as sergeant major. They're all linked together, it's hard to separate, and the other as a commissioned officer, as a training officer. And while it might seem a contradiction in terms in that sergeants major are frequently stereotyped as very, very strong traditionalists that are resistant to change. Sorry to any sergeants major out there. My dad wasn't that way. Well, he's involved in training for most of his service, but he has very strong ideas about what it took to be a good police officer. And I think when he became training officer, he had an opportunity to move some of those ideas forward. Now, he would be the first to say that he didn't own all of these initiatives. And just like my own time in Surrey, the success that was achieved in Surrey wasn't just me. It was the staff that worked with my dad that moved these ideas forward as well. But he brought many, there are many changes to training during his time as a training officer. Cross-cultural training, which is, I mean, to this day, is a very strong element of the training component here at Depot. Recognizing that all people aren't the same, that we can't provide a single single type response for every type of situation. The work with the greater emphasis and a move away from the physical training aspect. Of course, the horses had gone by the wayside in 1966. But he recognized that human relations and academic training would better prepare the young police officer to meet the very diverse needs at their first detachment. You know, things like bringing in actors from Regina to role play, scenario play in domestic violence situations. All of those things were an attempt to allow that police officer to be better prepared when they went to their first detachment. And by extension, I mean, this is the true objective, is to provide a better service to the citizens that they were providing that service to. And I know that my dad was very, very proud of the work that he did as a training officer. He had a close association with the University of Regina, one that allowed him to collaborate and also to be exposed to different ways of thinking. He's very proud of his recognition, being recognized by the University of Regina by being provided an honorary doctorate of law degree. And I think for him, for someone who had no real CV and formal education, in fact it was grade 8 is where he finished off and before he joined the Navy and went to the Second World War. He was very, very proud of that he had demonstrated a pursuit of learning and a pursuit of innovation, and it was recognized as such by the University of Regina.
The other day we were meeting with a police force, a fairly prominent police force in the United States, came to Regina here to look at our training, to say, hey, how can we do this? How can we make our police force more tuned to the communities they police? And it all started back in the late 70s with my father's introduction of human relations. Now, he didn't do that on his own, and some of the most powerful things he did when he was the training officer is to ensure he had the very, very best people here at Depot. It was so important for him to have leaders and people who were forward-thinking involved. He was one of the first, the RCMP deserves credit, and so does my father, for hiring people like Gary Bell, who is a psychologist, and saying, we need to have the education, we need to have the people, so we have evidence-based training, not just what the guy who last was in the field thought would be a good idea, but rather to change it so that it was real research and it was based on evidence what would change members' performance in the field. And that's where scenario-based training and learning came from, which is a cornerstone now. When I went through training in 1980, I did 1 or 2 scenarios. The cadet of today will do 125 scenarios. So when he gets to the field, the idea of investigating a crime is not something new. He's done it many, many times before. And he learns to apply the knowledge that he's gained here in real life situations.
We've talked somewhat about my dad being a traditionalist, but not handcuffed by that tradition. I think probably the best example I can provide to that was the decision by the force and by the force to engage women as part of the organization as regular members. And in 1974, the very first troop of female members was squatted here at Depot. I wasn't a member at that time, but I was living at Depot, and certainly it was a very unique point in the history of the force. really, I mean, a seminal moment for the force when you consider the March West, certainly our contribution to foreign wars, our service to Canadians, but there's certain times within the history of the force that you can say that really changed the force, and that was something that really did change the force. And, you know, my next comments will probably, you know, send a message about how much Canadian culture and the culture in the force has changed in the interval. When I became a member and I was in E Division, many times people would ask me the question, geez, what did your dad think about women joining the force? You know, implying that he probably didn't think much of it, given his traditionalist perspective. And men are men, that kind of thing. But I know firsthand that while the decision was not his, certainly he supported it, because he recognized that the service that we provide to Canadian citizens is not just to males, it is to all of Canadian society. And for a police organization to be effective and to be trusted, it must be reflective of that society. And hence the diversity in the organization that we see today in comparison to 1972, 1973. And obviously women would be a big part of that. So my dad's responsibility and contribution during that time was ensuring that the squatting of that troop, to the degree possible, would be appropriate and professional, and also because there's a lot of work up to the arrival of those 32 women. But more importantly, would be to set the tone and the expectation for the members of the staff in terms of appropriate reception and treatment of those new members of the force. They were not the female members, they were members of the force. And I can advise you that he wholeheartedly supported that move of the force. He did whatever he could to ensure that those female members, those first women in the organization, were provided a platform for success in their career.
It's kind of a cute little story about my father and my brother, where my father was lecturing a troop on their graduation, and he was saying to the troop, you know, gee, look out the window. You see that long-haired guy walking across the street there? What kind of guy wouldn't cut his hair, wouldn't have proper grooming and whatnot? And very quickly, because obviously he's the training officer and a person in authority, they start to agree and they start to buy in, and they're agreeing with him and saying all kinds of terrible things about my brother. And then my dad stopped them. He said, I happen to know that fella. That's my son, Fraser. And he's an excellent person. You've just judged someone on two things: on the way I've encouraged you to view people, and secondly, on his appearance. And that's wrong. And I can't help but think back to Samuel Steele, and he was doing the same thing. I'm sure there was, at the time, with First Nations, there was a lot of misunderstanding, but he saw them for what they were, just like my dad saw people for what they were. And I think that's a big step towards innovation, is understanding people. Because when we talk about training, or we talk about people in general and serving our communities, we're really talking about working with people and communication and understanding them, walking a mile in their shoes, so to speak.
Being a police officer today is different. It's different than it was when I joined. It's different than it was 10 years ago. And I think we'll continue to see things. It's a dynamic world we live in now. There's changes very quick. I think one of the things that has really become front and center from a public perspective is police accountability. And there's many ways where the public expects the police to be held accountable. But really for us, that's nothing new. There's always been a great deal of accountability inherent in being a police officer. It's more apparent today, but it should never be lost on any police officer that their accountability first is to the citizens of this country and to the people whom they serve. That's ultimate number one. It's not to the government, it's not to the force, it's not to the watch, it's to the people we serve. That's your primary accountability. And that is something that I think can never be emphasized too much, that accountability to the people, because that's what a police officer is there for. Robert Peel, for the people, by the people.
I was posted at a place called St. Rose de Lac. I was the ops NCO there, and all the people were single, young members of the force. So every Thanksgiving, everyone would show up at our house and eat all my food and you know, my wife's cooking and whatnot. So it was always that sense of family, that sense of belonging. And I see it at Depot all the time. We have troop reunions where people have left Depot 50 years earlier and they come back. How profound is the effect of Depot when 50 years after you've gone through Depot, and you only spent 6 months here, or 10, depending on when you went through, you only spent 6 to 10 months here, and then you come back, it must be your home, because that's the only place you go after 50 years of being away. So that idea of family and community within members is something that I've always felt and I feel strongly about, and that sense of belonging. And Depot is hard. I want to stress that. Depot is hard. It's hard in a different way than when I went through, and even different than when my dad went through, but it's hard. And I think when you arrive at your first posting, there's a certain acceptance of you. Because if you made it through Depot, you must have something to offer. And you might prove that you're no good later on, but for the most part, you're accepted right off as having the criteria to be an excellent member. And I think that draws us all together. At your first posting, well, who was your drill instructor? As opposed to, you have all those shared experience. My self-defense instructor was tougher than your self-defense instructor. You should have seen him. He was crazy, that guy. Those kind of stories immediately cause bonding among the members in the field, and that sense of belonging and that sense of fellowship that continues on from the time the force started. And it's why the RCMP, even to this day, retains its employees for so very, very long. If you look at most employers, the idea of keeping an employee for 15 years, at most members make it to 25. The very vast majority make it to 25 years service. Why would you do that? It's that sense of belonging, that sense of purpose that you enjoy.
If you are motivated by making a difference, by trying to help someone, that public service ideal, this is the job for you. Because today, you'll get that chance. Tomorrow, you'll get that chance. And the next day, you'll get that chance. That's what police work is all about. And if you keep that in the front of your mind, all those other things are good, and they have to be there as well, too. But if you keep that in the front of your mind, that we're here to help people, that you're there to help to make a difference in someone's life. And it doesn't have to be a life-changing difference. It's just for that moment in time. Then you'll always make the right decisions. And if you add in the amount of police on top of that, you can't look at a single member, and of course I know many, as do all members, with say 20-year service or so, who has not had an opportunity to have unique life experiences. It doesn't matter what path your career has taken, where you have served. If you serve in this organization long enough, given the national mandate that this organization has, you will be provided unique life experience opportunities that you will never experience in any other organization. It's just the nature of how things go. It's not just about that big investigation. It's opportunities to be involved in VIP visits, royal visits, respond to natural disasters, because with those provincial police forces, those provinces that have the RCMP as provincial police forces, we go. When the bell rings, we go. So when they have the fires in the Okanagan, you'll get a chance to go there and be a part of that and make a difference and contribute to that. Depot is a place that I think every serving police officer should reconnect with during their service. Certainly within my service, I have always been an optimist anyway. I'm a very positive individual. So it's not like I ever got down out there in the field. But, you know, the kind of grind can make you, not make you, in the grind, the day-to-day grind, you can sometimes lose sight of where we all came from and what was important to us way back when. In my experience, every time I've returned to Depot, I have been impressed by our foundation, our bedrock, the enthusiasm of cadets now, the enthusiasm of the staff, the professionalism of the training cadre, the innovation in the training program reminded me, and should remind all members who return, the caliber and quality of organization that we have, leading policing in the whole world, as demonstrated by many who visit here to try and gain insight into our training practices. We have a fantastic organization, one that has been built from that commonality, that base commencement at Depot. And when you return to Depot as a serving member, you are reminded of that enthusiasm, that passion, and I always return to the field renewed by that visit.
When I get the opportunity to talk to a graduating troop, I am always so excited, and I tell them that. I said, just think, the next person you arrest, imagine finishing training, the next person you arrest is going to be a real arrest. You're really going to arrest a bad guy. So in a week from now, you go and you get your badge and all those good things. A week from then, you'll probably be putting handcuffs on a real criminal. Pretty exciting stuff.
I've had an opportunity to travel all over the world, meet people that I never would have had an opportunity to meet before, and it's all because I've been a member of the RCMP. Those opportunities wouldn't have come to me otherwise. And I just am so blessed to have had those opportunities in the career that I've had in the force.